Welcome, fans, to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, joined by my co-host of the three-man booth, Colin Crandall of the MMA Power Hour Empire. And tonight we have a very special guest in the form of a legendary cutman, TV commentator, actor, and author, Stitch Duran. So that is something we're very pleased about, and we're going to get into a good conversation here. But Colin, before we get to Stitch, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good, brother. Doing good, man. We're over here in United States, and you're over there in Canada. So always good to have a connection with our Canadian brothers.
Yes, sir. Stitch, I'll start the questions if you don't mind. The Hannibal TV is largely a professional wrestling centered channel, but we do we're increasing into more combat sports content. Do you have any connections with the pro wrestling industry at all? And if so, do you have any thoughts about that business?
You know, it's funny you bring that up, Jack, because my daughter Carla is like a fanatic on wrestling. And I mean, she's gone to Seattle for, what do they call the big ones, the big super fights, all that.
WrestleMania?
WrestleManias. And so she's a big wrestling fan. And when Brock Lesnar came into the UFC, I was the one that was designated to wrap his hands. So after the weigh-ins of his first fight, him and I we're in the Mandalay Bay. We go into one of the locker rooms, and Carla, my daughter's with us, and I'm wrapping Brock's hands as a test run to see if there's any adjustments, whatever. And she's excited. And of course, we take pictures together, and then I always cut them off, and then I'll pull it off, and then I'll tape it together like a glove. And he signed it and gave it to Carla, So I'm not as deep involved. I'm not like Carla. Carla's a fanatic when it comes to that.
So let me ask you, Stitch, speaking about wrestling, that was pro wrestling, amateur wrestling. That was something that wasn't really part of your background, but I know you got very familiar with it pretty darn quickly. What was your thought when you got into MMA in the beginning? You had been a kickboxer and a boxer, and you had trained people, and you had been a cut man already in boxing. What was your first thought of collegiate and amateur wrestling when you first saw it, and the grappling and jiu-jitsu? Did you like what you were seeing? Did you get it really quickly and easily, or did it take a minute for you to kind of see the value in it and learn how it worked?
Colin, of all the years, and it's 30 plus years I've been in this game, and I've done a whole bunch of interviews. You're the first one ever to bring that point up. And
thank you.
So, my first fight with the UFC, Jack, was UFC 32, 33. Anyway, Dave Monet and Jens Pover were the first two guys that I wrapped. And not knowing what the Militich camp was, not knowing what grappling was. Like I say, I come from a stand-up game. To see these guys, and first to work with them in the dressing room and get to know their character and their athleticism, and to see them to go out there and work and do all these maneuvers, like say Militich camp. I didn't know they were one of the best. So that was my first introduction, Jack, to any type of grappling, And now as the game went on, I understood the advantages, the situations, the position is a little bit more, and how dangerous. And I always tell people I'm glad I'm old, man, because I don't have to get involved with that game.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. And it's tough. Wrestling is a really rugged sport. I've trained jiu-jitsu, and even up recently I've trained it at my age. You can train jiu-jitsu at any age. It is tough and it is rough, and at some point it can take a real toll on your joints and your body. A lot of these guys, I talked to Beneil Dariush, who's number 2 ranked in the world, I think, and it should be next up for the title shot in the UFC at 155. And he's been doing this since he was in his teens, and he's about 33 now. And I said, do you think you'll do this in your 40s and even train jiu-jitsu? And he said, no, I don't think so. And he said, it's, already so much wear and tear. And he said, I'm not going to have anything to prove then. And I said, it is tough. I said, because especially if you've been training it for a lot of years. However, to try to train collegiate and amateur wrestling, it past like 25 or 28, it's brutal. It's brutal. I mean, everyone you ask, it literally, because it uses your core so much with all the dipping. I mean, look at how hard it is to do squats and lunges already, and add the speed and going forward in doing them and constantly doing it again. A rough sport, a lot of rugged guys. Like I remember in wrestling, Bruno Sammartino. I'm sure you guys remember him. And he wasn't actually a wrestler, although a collegiate wrestler, although he learned some. But all the grappling he was doing, you see what a tough guy he looked like. And I remember Rocky Marciano was a little bit before him, but they were around at a similar time. And I remember how tough Rocky Marciano was. But if you look at Bruno Sammartino, he looked like if he would have gotten a hold of Rocky Marciano, he could have thrown him through the floor. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean he would have won the fight, right. But just I think a lot of people didn't know, and now we know how rugged wrestlers really are. Homage and respect to pro wrestlers, but I'm talking especially people with a collegiate, amateur, and folk style wrestling background. Definitely some tough guys, that's for sure. Jack, go ahead.
And let me add, not knowing a lot about wrestling, but I've been in Japan with Josh Barnett for the New Japan Pro Wrestling, and so I got to see that circuit, right? And that itself was a trip. But I remember Zach, because he used to do what was the sport, pancreas,
right?
But Bill Robinson, that was an old veteran wrestling guy from the old days. Jack, you might remember going way back. Every time we'd go to Japan, we would go train at his gym, and Josh was telling me just the history that he has and what much of a legend he was. But such a good guy. But to see him and Josh work on moves was quite impressive. So, I'm not into it, but God, I've been surrounded by the best of the best.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, Jack, you remember guys like that. Gene LaBelle, I'm wearing a Gene LaBelle shirt here. I don't know if we can see it here. And highest stop from the back with Gene Gokor. God bless my friend, the late Gene LaBelle. But yeah, people like Carl Gotch, Billy Robinson, the guy from
Billy Wicks.
Yeah, Billy Wicks. Also John Blooming, the guy from Holland. Just a lot of really tough guys. The guys that knew the catch wrestling holds the hookers back in the day.
Yes.
In the carnivals, very tough. And Jack, were you familiar with some of these guys as the years went by in pro wrestling? It sounds like you were.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting to plug our second or third man in the booth, the King of Connecticut. His book details the history of grappling and freestyle wrestling and how it really started in the carnivals and how it's intertwined very much so into what was not so much maybe these days, but the classic golden era of professional wrestling. There were a lot of hookers and shooters. Luthez comes to mind in addition to the other names. So it's something that really has its roots. Pro wrestling really has its roots in freestyle wrestling, classic wrestling, which is, to get another plug in, Mr. Jake Shannon and his Shoot Pro promotion. We're looking for some big things coming out of that in 2023. Won't spill the beans, so to speak, right now, but we're looking at an association with Great North Wrestling. So we are an organization that is very aware of and proud of the roots of professional wrestling. We're trying to go in a different direction than some of the other companies out there. But Stitch, I wanted to ask you to circle back to combat sports in general. Which sport do you think is doing better, so to speak, in terms of fan awareness and support right now? Would that be pro boxing or mixed martial arts? And what about 10 years from now? Where do you see that going?
Well, all the above, but right now, believe it or not, is bare knuckle fighting. I've worked with them when they first started. They found and brought me on board. The COVID kicked in, and when it started up again, Top Rank, based here in Las Vegas, offered me kind of being the house cut man for them. So I've been doing boxing, but bare knuckle boxing is super sport. You know, they all get cut, but they're not deep cuts like they are in MMA. And then they have a rule which I think MMA should implement, where because they get cut, right? So the referee could stop the fight, bring them to me, and the doctor's next to me, and I have 30 seconds to work on them, and the doctor evaluates him at that point to see whether he could continue or not. And I think that's a great rule, and so that's growing. You know, boxing still, you know, it always keeps its steady stream. MMA, I don't know, you know, how much bigger it's going to grow, if it's going to grow. But if any one of those three that are growing, it's bare knuckle fighting. That slap fighting, I have to speak about it. I think it's horrible. You know, somebody for me in my position, that my only job is to take care of fighters, and I've seen the progression of dementia pugilistica with many fighters. And I mentioned before, Jack, that you know, I've seen it through boxing, right? But when I started with the MMA world, there was no dementia. Years later, I've been gone 8 years. So I'm running into guys that I used to work with, and you can see the pattern of speech has deteriorated. So this slap fighting, yeah, it's horrible. It just don't make sense.
No, it almost seems like Dana's coming up with if he was a batter in baseball, he's coming up with strike after strike. You know, he you know, with slapping his wife, which was very unfortunate, although she slapped him first, and then this slap fighting. Yeah, this is a really bad look. This is very dangerous, and it's almost like if that were to get a foothold in this country, then it wouldn't say a lot, I think, about the country. Almost, you might as well then start allowing cockfighting and fighting with pit bulls, and it's not what we want, because then pretty much all of a sudden you'll be back until the old Roman Colosseum, where you're throwing a little Christian against the lion, and that's not part of combat sports. It's unfortunate.
You know, I look at it as on the business side of it. See, with the UFC, the Fertitas are the ones that controlled the whole program.
Yeah.
And it was the face of the company and did a great job doing that. Well, I don't know if the Fertitas are involved in the negotiating to buy that program. You never hear their name mentioned. So if Dana did that on his own, it just shows his business skills.
Yeah, without a doubt. And let me speak on something kind of related to that, but very loosely. We're talking about problems. Fighter pay is a big issue. Francis Ngannou just left the organization. Now, obviously, we've seen people leave UFC before. We've seen people leave their boxing promoter before. But Stitch, can you remember a time where a current heavyweight champion, even though maybe he didn't have as much hype around him or buzz as Conor McGregor, still a dominant heavyweight champion with the one-punch knockout power? When was the last time you can remember someone like that walking away or parting ways at the top with where they were working?
Well, Lou Brock with the old Cardinals, when he started the Association of Players Association, he took that giant leap, right? Me, you know, spoke up about unfair practices, and I'm at the top of my game, and I go and when I found out about Francis Ngannou doing the same thing, I applaud him, you know, and he will be handsomely rewarded now. You know, I've worked with Tyson Fury. I've worked 2 of his fights, right? And he's bringing him a proposal that is unquestionably going to make him a lot more money. And and it's part. He said, just do it in the cage, 4-ounce gloves. They have Mike Tyson be the referee. Why not? You know,
I love it.
Why not make $40 million? Instead of Dana says, I offered him $8 million to fight John Jones on a 3-fight deal. Well, you know, compared to one fight with Tyson Fury and Mike Tyson, his credibility is only going to go up and up and up. So why?
Yeah, without a doubt. You know what I thought was really interesting that I've never seen before was that Francis brought stuff to the table that would have helped a lot of UFC fighters. And big respect to Francis. I don't know if I mean, I've not been privy to huge contract negotiations. I think probably Stitch, out of all three of us, has been the more privy to what someone was offered by just your friendship with so many fighters. But to me, it blew my mind in a positive way that Francis Ngannou, with all he had to risk, went to negotiations and said, I want this. I want there to be fighters being able to once again wear their sponsors' gear and get paid like they were in the first 20 years of the UFC. I want there to be a fighter representative and media. I mean, that was beautiful and amazing. And literally, had the UFC gone for that, I think that would have been a huge step on the right path. And it's very unfortunate because according to Francis, they looked at that stuff and they weren't even willing to talk about it. It was like it was a no, no, and no on all of that immediately. And that's really unfortunate. I understand maybe them not wanting to be told how they run their own business, but let me ask you, Stitch, you've been in the game for decades. Could they have gone for that without causing thousands of hours of going over paperwork for them? Or would it have been, in all honesty, a huge legal conundrum or cluster F if they would have agreed to that? Would it have caused them hours, hundreds of hours of misery implementing that, or could they have done it without maybe that much issue?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's going into the legals and all that, and I just I stay out of that problem.
Yeah,
but,
no, understandable.
When you brought up the point of all those issues that you brought up, that Francis Ngannou is really brought up, and their fair request. Well,
yeah.
Let me listen now, Jack. This is your podcast, and when we speak tomorrow, 23 years ago, I put a documentary together called Boxer's Nightmare that deals with all the hardships that fighters were going through before UFC were going through. And I have an all-star cast of Mike Tyson. A week before he got his tattoo, he's saying, look, here's what fighters should do. I have all these guys that have, and all these, they're Hall of Famers now. The majority of them have passed away. And I didn't see this film for about 20 years. The guy that directed it was a young kid that just graduated from the American Film Institute, John Barnhouse, 23-year-old kid. Well, he passed away a couple months ago. So but in leading to that, I saw this film for the first time again after 20 years. We did it on a zero budget, but we got the best interviews. We brought every issue that he's talking about, plus dehydration, dementia, fighter pay, attorney fee. We had the best of the best in boxing that explained what should be done. And as I looked at this film 2 months ago, nothing's been done, and now you include MMA with it. And when Francis Ngannou did that, I thought, as a tribute to John Barnhouse, my buddy, I'm going to let the world know you could go to YouTube and get Boxer's Nightmare and take a look at it. It's an hour and 8 minutes, but it brings up all the issues that are still affecting combat sports, and nobody has done anything with fighter associations. There was an answer to how you could do it. It's dehydration, the dangers of dehydration. I mean, fighter pay, everything. So, Jack, if your fans could go to YouTube and dig up Boxer's Nightmare and check it out, man, you'll see that the game hasn't changed. And Francis Ngannou, bless his heart, man. He took a giant step for everybody. Let me finish up by saying this, and I know how he feels because it took a man to do what he did. It's been 8 years. It's been 8 years since the UFC let me go, Jack and Colin, and till now, people stop me in the streets all over the world and thank me for doing what I did. But the best compliment I've gotten in this whole thing was we were doing fights in the bubble at the MGM, boxing with Top Rank, and Luis Doria, that trained Anderson Silva, a lot of the top Brazilian fighters, comes up to me because he has a Brazilian boxer, and I haven't seen him in 8 years, Colin. He comes and looks to me. I'm sitting and I'm eating, and he says, Stitch, he says, we, the coaches, the fighters, we thank you for speaking up because we couldn't.
Yep.
Francis Ngannou was the first one to do it. So there you go, Jack. And
very true.
You guys are the first ones I've told this to because I think it's important for people to look at this film and say, you know what, man, we got to change it somehow.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, Stitch. Sorry if I jumped over your words, Jack. Also, tomorrow it'll be my MMA Power Hour, Stitch. Jack won't be there for that. But definitely we look forward to this continuing a great chat here. Yeah, that we really appreciate that. And the boxer's nightmare. And then, yeah, we what really should be implemented is the Muhammad Ali Act. I know John Fitch, Kung Lee, Nate Quarry, a bunch of those guys are still in litigation with the UFC pushing for that. And I hope they get it. But yeah, so much important stuff. And it definitely, really, if the UFC had been smart, you'd still be there, would have been there all these last 8 years, and would be Francis. But go ahead, Jack, if you have any follow-up or a question for Stitch.
Yeah, I had a follow-up just to close the loop on the slap fighting deal. We had Lights Out Lytle on the show last week, and we discussed
From
this. And
BKFC,
he was
right? He
of
has
the
nothing to do with
view
slap. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify. Chris
no,
Lights Out
no. But he
from
was
BKFC, commentator
he
for
had an
BKFC.
opinion on it.
And what do you say?
Yes, indeed. He offered the opinion that the phenomenon exists because networks are so in need of content, especially in combat sports. But to put that lens on bare knuckle fighting, what do you think needs to happen to have that expand and grow in terms of scope and reach?
If you're asking me, I don't know. I don't want it to grow. You know?
No, he means BKFC, Stitch.
Oh, BK. What do they have to do?
BKFC.
They're doing everything right. You know, Dave Feldman. I know because number one, I'm so glad for Chris Lido. I'm glad you had him on. I saw him in Las Vegas about 3 weeks ago. He's doing a tremendous job, and he's one of the pillars of BKFC. And but Dave Feldman is doing a tremendous job, bro. He treats these fighters with respect. You know, he gives them everything that they're entitled to. You know, so if you're going to do anything as a promoter with your fighters, do it the way Dave Feldman and his crew are doing it. Tremendous. I wish I had, time to go back and Dave he's left the door open for me. When I saw him one of the Jake Paul fights, I explained to him, here's where I'm at and here's where you're at. But, he says, hey man, but he had told me one time we did a show in Cancun and he pulls me aside and says, Stitch, we're in the lobby of the hotel. Can we talk about having you do this full time and not go to any other organization? Because we don't want people to think that they are us. And at that point, I said, yeah, of course, Dave. I'm a man of honesty, and I always cover people. People that help me out, I help them out. So guaranteed. That's why people ask me about what do you think about BKFC. When it first started, there was so much negative content, but I've worked them all, and the fighters are great. They're in top shape. They're going to get cut, but the cuts aren't, and they're multiple, but they're not as deep as you are with an elbow or a knee or a ground and pound and all that. So it's a good sport.
Without a doubt, that's going to keep growing. And it's good to know you're exclusive as far as bare knuckle activity with the BKFC. And I think in boxing, you're still a free agent, or are you kind of working with someone with regular traditional boxing exclusively as well?
No, like I said, I teamed up with Top Rank. Me and Mike Basil are the house cutmen for them. And how this program started, Jack, is when Dana brought me into the UFC, it was only Leon Tabbs was the original cutman from UFC #1. And Burt Watson were the only two originals. So Dana was smart enough to say, you know what, let's have a cut man in each corner because MMA guys don't know how to wrap hands or don't know how to work cuts. So Dana brought me in. And in doing that, we set up this program where we take care of the fighters. We wrap their hands, we work their cuts. But the techniques that we did there, I established, and now everybody using worldwide, where they put the Vaseline on the hand, so that, you can put it on the face, the adrenaline. And instead of putting the swabs in your mouth or your ear, you put them in a swab and you wear gloves. That's the new form of cutman. Well, when the COVID kicked in, boxing never had that. And Top Rank just had 32 shows on ESPN. And that's why they called me and asked if I'd be interested in being one of the two cutmen. And so that opened up the doors of boxing, but I still do a lot of independents. I do a lot of the celebrity ones. And, I'll be in Saudi Arabia on the 25th for independent, boxing. So if there's a date available, I'm available. I'm in.
I love it. You are definitely the king of frequent flyer mileages, man. You don't give up, and it's an amazing thing. I'm going to ask you a quick question here that I think Jack will like. Any memory of working with the biggest Canadian names, just for Jack here, in MMA or in boxing? Any memory of the biggest name Canadian combat sports athletes you've worked with in either MMA or boxing?
Yeah, of course, George St. Pierre, of course, David Loiseau. I call David Loiseau my employer, right? Because when he fought Evan Tanner, I'll never forget, man. That's Leon Times and myself were working.
Yeah.
I'm working on Evan Tanner, and he has like 5 cuts on top of his head, and I'm trying to work on this, and I said, man, you always give me work, right? But yeah, those 2 guys, I've worked with Roy McDonald. If they fought in the UFC when I was with them, I worked with them. I was usually their primary guy that they would ask for my services, and so yeah, I've worked with them all. I mean,
and in boxing, any Canadian names in boxing you can remember?
No, gotta say, don't. I do a lot of Eastern European, and but no.
Yeah, it makes sense. There hasn't really been huge Canadian stars in boxing in the last couple of decades. Jack, or am I wrong? Are you that? Or Jack, I don't know how much you follow boxing, but not a lot in the last couple of decades.
Dating back to George Chuvalo after
I was just thinking of George Chuvalo, yeah. But that goes back to where Stitch was a child walking around in short pants probably in those days.
But Scotty Olsen was the name then, right? And God, I'm trying to think. There was one Canadian that I worked with, but I think he was like from your side of the country, Jack, but I forgot his name. And if I heard it, I'm sure, I worked with him also. So
no problem. Jack, you got another question for Stitch? Fire away.
Yeah, actually I do. I'm wondering if with the creation of women's divisions and whatnot and combat sports, if you see from your standpoint that women have become more fans, if that fan base has grown over the years from your perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And I used to work the Invicta fights also before this COVID. Yes. And I really didn't understand how good these women were, but these women were tremendous. Yes. Great athletes, and great fighters. And I loved working those fights. And yeah, they can fight, man, and they're good. I remember one fight, Invicta fight, is girls all banged up, and I think she lost, and I go to the back later on to wrap one of the other girls' hands, and she's there breastfeeding her baby. So wow. I know it's a different category of fighting, but nonetheless, yeah, I love working them, and they're doing good. They deserve the money that they get, and even more. Absolutely. But yeah, I love working their fights. Don't mind at all, because they're always top of the line fights. They're action fights.
Yeah, without a doubt, the women bring it. They really do. The fun thing I was saying to a friend the other day is the difference in mindset that sometimes makes the women's fights more exciting is the following. A guy can look at another guy, and if the other guy is like a 4-time Division I wrestler or Olympic qualifier or Olympian, the other guy's not going to try to wrestle him. If the guy was a former world-class kickboxer, competed in Glory, K1, whatever, he's not going to try to strike with him. The women are so confident that they're the better athlete that they'll look at that and say, she was an Olympian, I'll out-wrestle her. Sure. And then they just go at it. And so it's definitely impressive. How about the women fans, though? I think that's also something Jack wanted your opinion on. Are combat sports getting more women fans? Because boxing for decades really didn't have women fans, although I think MMA is kind of starting to grab some. What's your thought about that for both sports?
Yeah, you're right. Jack asked that question. I didn't answer it, but yeah, they are. You just see it with the fans, how they react to these events, to these fighters and all that, and they're just like the men. That's also happening with the bare knuckle fights. That these women are getting. Listen, I think we as human beings, when it comes to combat sports, we want to see, blood, knockouts, and good fights, and the women are accepting it just like us.
Definitely, they're definitely enjoying it. Let me ask you about some matchups here, Stitch. So Francis Ngannou, it's so hard to know what he would do against a top boxer, but I like the fact that Tyson Fury is saying, hey, we can do 4-ounce gloves. We can get the cage in there. The rest, I think, is going to be Marcus of Queensberry rules. But I don't think anyone in the world would know better than you, Stitch. Could Francis possibly do something in that fight against Tyson Fury, or would Tyson Fury basically make easy work out of him and just be able to clown around and smoke him? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, whenever you're a heavyweight, you got that one shot stuff. And yeah, 100% he's capable. His game plan would be to bum rush him. Bum rush Tyson Fury, you cut him off and you throw bang, bang, bang. But the thing about it, you got to cut him off because Tyson Fury will beat you from the outside. And, when I started working with him, because I worked with Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko for 8 years, right? And when Vladimir beat him, or when he beat Vladimir, we look at him, we think, this guy's not even an athlete. When I started working with him, well, I saw him fight Deontay Wilder. Then I realized how good of a fighter he was. And when I started working with him, I said, I didn't understand you, but style-wise, he's like a heavyweight Mayweather. But everybody's capable of getting knocked out, especially when you're like Francis Ngannou. Yeah, I would bum rush him, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and maybe even try to push him against the cage, because that's something that Tyson wouldn't be used to, although I'm sure he'd be getting a lot of work in there. Tell me if I'm not wrong on this, or if I am wrong on this. Tyson Fury's boxing punching technique doesn't look super polished to me. His defense is great. His head movement is great. He hits hard. Obviously, his technique is way better than me or someone who's talking from the outside. But it looks to me like, as far as like straight punching, he's not necessarily the most polished technical puncher. Or am I wrong?
What makes him good?
Right.
Right. You could teach somebody how to block a straight punch, right? But can you? And that's the thing. That's what I compared him to Floyd Mayweather, because what Floyd does is all natural, and what Tyson Fury does is all natural, and his defensive skills are awesome. And when he fought Deontay Wilder, just to go and attack him with 3, 4, or 5 shot combinations, he does it his way. His body don't look like anybody else.
No.
His body don't look like that at all. But he can fight.
Makes sense. Do you think Francis in boxing would be a one-off, or do you think if somehow he could get an Anthony Joshua fight or something, he might be looking for a couple? Because I kind of feel like if you can't beat the best, Tyson Fury, that doesn't mean maybe you can't beat like an Anthony Joshua, someone that might be more matched appropriately or for Francis. If you were Francis's manager and you could pick the first fight, knowing that you would get a second fight, would you pick Anthony Joshua first, or someone entirely different, Wilder or one of the other guys, or Usyk or Ruiz, or what would be your first fight if you could pick, and then you could pick 2 fights?
Yeah, you throw out Ruiz at the end. He would be very dangerous. He would catch him coming in, right? But yeah, I would get somebody of a second tier instead of an A+ fighter. Get somebody, that's let's say David Haye. If you got David Haye that that he's brawn and strength, he's going to have an advantage. And because at that point you just need the name, and he's still going to make money. At that point it's not about championship fights or anything like that. It's about winning, not getting hurt, and making money.
Makes sense. Here's one, and I'll let Jack in next, I promise. Who do you feel might have more potential? And I guess this is a little bit of an unfair question because one is older than the other. But if you look at Francis, who's 35 approximately, and you look at Jake Paul, who's 25, obviously there's a lot more time for Jake Paul. But do you feel that that they both kind of bring something equal to the game of boxing now? Or do you think maybe at this point Francis might have more skill to go against a better opponent? Because no one's talking about Jake Paul going up against a champion now. Would Francis possibly be the MMA, the fighter that has more boxing talent now, or would it be Jake Paul in your opinion?
Jake Paul's a good athlete, and he does come back. Well, when I first met Jake Paul and Logan Paul, because excuse me, the first fight I worked with KSI when he
Yeah.
fought Logan Paul. But when I found out that both these brothers were wrestlers from Ohio, I knew that they were going to be good athletes. And Jake Paul, I know their trainers, Benji Flores, and then Danny Smith, two very, very good trainers that I worked with. BJ Flores as a fighter, and I've seen him as a coach. Danny Smith was top of the line. So he's working with good people and doing things at top notch. So, Francis, to be honest with you, I have never seen him fight.
Yeah. Well, he's a power puncher. He's been learning a little bit of technique. Mike Tyson showed him a few things. He's got an amazing uppercut. He throws his whole body into an uppercut. And but no, that's an honest opinion. I appreciate that. I think he's got some skill. So does Jake. Jack, go ahead. And I guess we don't want to keep Stitch more than, what time is it? Is my clock wrong? So no, we're good. We're good till 5:30, right, Stitch?
Yeah, no, whatever, that's fine. Oh, but let me ask, with Francis Angulo, I've worked with a lot of Nigerians, Duncan Dakawari, Samuel Peter, Friday Anaya, and these guys are all big heavyweights, right? And they could crack, so yeah, but they're all good fighters. Francis Angulo's an athlete, so to transfer him, change it from MMA to boxing, it wouldn't be that hard to do.
I agree. Let me stick in one quick thing, Jack. If you had to think, Stitch, of a Nigerian fighter that maybe could have been king, who might you think of? He was on the way to possibly being the heavyweight champ more than 20 years ago.
He went to jail.
Yes.
What's his name? Yeah.
They called him the president, Ike Ibeabuchi. I'm telling you.
He fought David in Sacramento, California.
And then Chris Bird. Remember, no one used to be able to put their hands on Chris Bird. Chris Bird was the Willie Pep and the Pernell Whitaker of heavyweights. He was making everyone look silly, and Ike got a hold of him, knocked him cold. Me and my friends my age still talk about Ike Ibeabuchi. I really believe, had he not gone to jail and had he got that Lennox Lewis fight, I feel like it's very possible he could have knocked Lennox Lewis cold. He was so fast.
He might have been in one of your prisons.
There we go.
I think they busted him here in Nevada or something like that. Huh? But he could have been one of your inmates, brother.
I think he could have been champion. Don't you agree, Stitch?
Yeah, no doubt.
Would have been amazing. Jack, go ahead.
Well, Stitch, I wanted to ask you about a debate or a topic that's been going around at least since the 80s, and former Governor Jesse Ventura with respect to pro wrestling. And that is, do you ever think there'll be a union or a sanctioning body covering mixed martial arts? And depending on your answer, I'd like to know your rationale either way.
And that was brought up by in the documentary Boxer's Nightmare. But yes, I think, and I've spoken to some guys from the union from New York, in the high-end union, and, about getting some kind of unionizing. But as Rolando Arellano said in the documentary, we're all independent contractors. So, but it's all in the name. It could be an association. It could be called a union. As long as you have the same foundation, the same pillars, why not do it, right? So there's it's Total Combat League that's being developed right now. And they're talking about insurance for fighters for that 1 year that they're within that team competition. And so I'm trying to find out how they're going to work that program, because all it takes is one step, right? And so your question to that, Jack, is should there be some kind of, everything that Francis brought up should be on the table. And Fernando Vargas, and I'll give you these quotes to let you know how great they were. Fernando Vargas, when he was going to fight Felix Trinidad, I interviewed him in his limousine, right? But he says, as long as you're winning, they keep feeding you the green pastures. And as soon as you lose, you're gone, right? So something has to be done. I mean, listen, man, we're in the new age of 2023, and these poor guys Dementia's a big thing, the punch drunk, not only for combat, even for wrestlers. I'm sure these guys are. Hey, I tell you what, man, if anybody's an athlete, it's these wrestlers. And I've been in these shows, them flipping and jumping, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, whoa, you have to be an athlete. When you're jumping from 30 feet out and you're landing, there has to be some pain, and just to look at these guys and admire them. And I talk about wrestling. Let me give you a story, Jack, on Brock Lesnar and some of the things that I benefit working with these guys in a position where they know I'm there to take care of them. So Brock was fighting kind of Frank Mir, I think. So I'm wrapping his hands and I'm putting his gloves on him to go out, and he had the 4X gloves, and they ripped just like the Hulk. And we only had 2 pairs, so finally I put them in. But I was telling him how much I liked this T-shirt, the sponsor shirt, and he said, "Oh, I packed one for you." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, my wife asked me, should we get one for Stitch?" And he says, "Yes." So I finished putting his gloves on. He went over there and he brought me a shirt.
Nice.
I'm talking about 4X gloves, Jack. Hold on. Give me just a minute. You guys talk amongst yourselves.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Yeah, Jack, it's absolutely one thing that I always say for people that are fans of the show or the wrestling that don't know me is that even though I've never had any involvement in pro wrestling, I always give all the respect in the world to it because it's a very dangerous sport. And the impact that you guys take, every combat sport athlete that comes from an actual combat sport into pro wrestling gets really good respect for how dangerous it is really quickly. So huge respect to the danger and the courage of these guys and girls now that are involved in pro wrestling. Go ahead, back with Stitch, your thought.
Anyway, so Brock Lesnar, he had 4-ounce gloves. I think the only pair that they had out there for him. But here's what 4-ounce gloves look like, bro. Look.
Wow. Look at that. Big bits. That's crazy. That's big. That is big. That's huge. So a Bigfoot hand.
They ripped. I kept them. I had them autograph them, and one of my prized possessions. So I do have a relationship with some wrestlers. And when last time I saw Brock, he comes and gives at ringside. He comes and gives me a chest bump.
Oh,
I'm throwing between his back, but that's the kind of relationship I have with him.
That's cool. He's a good dude. What an incredible natural physique. Like Mike Tyson, people look at Mike Tyson when he was 14 years old and he was like 5'10" and 190 pounds or something. But Brock, I think, takes the cake. I think Brock, when he was 17 years old, was like 6'3" and 260 of muscle when he was like 17 years old. That's insane. Talk about genetics.
Yeah, exactly. And just built like a bull naturally. And wasn't he a farm boy? So he worked as a
Minnesota farm boy.
Well, he's also an honorary Canadian, as he has a farm up in Saskatchewan, outside of Saskatoon. So we have big respect for Brock up here, and talk about an opportunity there to be involved in that. What a series of fights with Brock and Frank Mir.
Yes,
unbelievable.
Yes, 2 great matches. And he got caught with I think it was the knee bar in that first fight, and very dangerous for wrestlers that don't know. You don't want to have your knee torn off and have your MCL, ACL, and every other L torn in one motion. So he had to tap out there. And in the next matchup, he just got good training. He just basically was able to keep the position on the ground, and just literally beat the living crap out of Frank Mir by just holding him down and smashing him. And it's interesting. Once in a while you're the nail, and once in a while you're the hammer. One of the things I was talking about, Stitch, on a show the other day, is watching the great career of Julio Cesar Chavez. Was absolutely one of the best. And everyone loses when they get older if they stay around long enough. So it's no crack on him. But I remember when he had gotten older and they matched him up against Kostya Tszyu. I'm sure you remember that fight. And I remember when I heard that fight announced, I said, this is just nothing but bad. I just said, this is just terrible. And I remember the fight doctor, Ferdy Pacheco, was really having a hard time doing the commentary. He was just saying, this is bad. This is not good. This is not good. This is all bad. And, but Chavez took it like a man. Sometimes you're the hammer and sometimes you're the nail. And the fact that he and his team took that fight, right? Because I think he kind of knew. I think he was kind of facing himself when he was 15 years younger.
Yeah.
Tell me. No, go ahead.
Let me add a couple things to this story. So the first world title fight that I worked, Jack, was Tony the Tiger Lopez from Sacramento, California, against Julio Cesar Chavez in Monterrey, Mexico.
Wow.
And so I was honored to, have, and I told him, I ran into him the other day and I told him, but Constance Zoo, his son is training here. He's going to fight one of the Charlos. And so I saw him last week in the gym and I told him how that I learned his father went through the training, pad work and this and that. And when it was time for him to get on the bag, he took his wraps off and he hit the bag just with his hands. And I was telling his son, Tim, I said, at that point, I thought he was crazy. But then as I looked at it, I broke it down into the physics and the conditioning. And that is a strong way to tighten up everything. And I thought that was very ingenious in his part. So, yeah.
I like that. Does Zoo have the skill? Can he compete with the Charlos, you think?
I think it's right now at this point, it's probably more in the good name. Charlos are pretty good.
Yeah, very, very good. But yeah, and Costa Zoo works his son's corner, doesn't he?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. But I
don't
think
think
so.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that's got to be a tough situation, especially if you're working your son's corner where they're coming up against someone really good, because you hate to. Yeah, in fact, I almost wonder if you had a son that was boxing, do you think you would work his corner, or do you think? Because I have a feeling I would hate to be in a situation watching my son getting the living piss beaten out of him, and be in the corner having to decide whether to stop a fight or not. What do you think?
I don't think I know. I've worked a lot of father-son combinations, and it's if they lose bad, it's usually not a good sign. If they're getting whooped, the emotions take control, and especially if they're the chief, what they call the chief second, the main guy giving the instructions. So I've seen it, and and I used to have a school of kickboxing, so all my kids could fight, but no, I wouldn't work a corner. I just leave that to somebody else.
Yeah, it makes sense because that puts you in a bad situation. Let me ask him one other thing, Jack, and I'll throw it to you. Do you think the corner in MMA works similar to the corner in boxing? Because it seems like the corner in the boxing, maybe I'm wrong, and I admit in the last several years I've been watching a lot more MMA. Before that, I watched a lot more boxing. But it seems like in boxing there was usually one guy that was doing almost all of the talking. In MMA, it's kind of similar, but then it seems like there's a few guys around. There's usually another MMA fighter in a fighter's corner. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. What's your thought on that? And also, from being in both corners, does it seem like a similar feeling, or does it seem like different? And if so, how so?
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's a great feeling to know that but you're focused on the same things every fight, whether it's MMA or whether it's boxing. But traditionally in the game of boxing, is the cut man's job is not to give instructions. The only one that should give instructions is the head coach, right? But I've seen it. Greg Jackson, great job. Mike Brown, great job working corners. But that's something you explain to the team before you go out there. If you have something to say, let me say my thing, and then you're coming from the outside of the cage, so he has to hear you, and you have to give him something of encouragement. So it's all communications.
Makes sense. And one thing I thought of is in MMA, you're going to have usually an MMA coach, and then maybe he'll be more experienced in the wrestling, and then you'll also have like the striking coach there. Or if the head coach is more experienced with the striking, you'll also have the wrestling coach there, a jiu-jitsu coach. So it kind of reminded myself, I think that's why you'll hear some different voices in the MMA corner, whereas you won't in the boxing corner. Jack?
Yeah, and that's a good point. As long as, one speaking after the other and in a cool, calm, and collected voice, that's important.
Makes sense. Jack, got a question?
Well, but we're flying through our time here, but on the Old School Shooters podcast, we have a question that we like to pose to all our guests because it speaks to, the mindset of those of us of a certain vintage and our philosophy behind the podcast. And that question, Stitch, is what does it mean to be old school to you philosophically or in terms of a lifestyle in this modern crazy era that we're living in?
That's a great question. And all over the world I go, Jack, and people say, hey, man, you're such a cool guy. You never change. I said, nah, man, I like me when I was then. Why not? I'm not going to change, so I'm the same guy but that's the old school's what gave me the new school. All right. What came here, but it gave me the skill level of knowing what I got to do. And as martial artists, we have an old saying that, when the student, which is our kids, when the student does better than the master, then the master's done his job, right? And I did my job through old school. My kids are still very well disciplined. They're all martial artists. They know to give back and all that. All that is old school teachings.
Absolutely. Do you think there's any different in mindset as far as that, Stitch, from because you first started in the game, I think about over 4 decades ago. Has the mindset in fighters or coaches changed at all in those times as far as looking back at maybe it being more old school back in the days? And can you still be that way and be part of the game, be kind of a throwback in old school?
Yeah, well, I always, that's a good question. Boxing, a lot of it hasn't changed, and you see some of the guys still doing, because there's no school, there's no education in doing what we do. So in boxing, the old school guys, the only way that they learn is by seeing somebody do it, whether it's right or wrong. And I remember when I was at my school of kickboxing, I was learning to be a cut man. I was already a trainer, and I went to a boxing event, and the guy did a good job. And I asked him, this was only boxing at that time, Jack. I asked him what he did, that I was trying to learn to be a cut man. And he says, F you, I'm taking this to my grave, and you got to learn like me. And he walked away.
Oh.
But that was a mentality then. But keep in mind, and I'll let you know here, Jack, is combat sports, and I guess even wrestling, and maybe you tell me whether it's right. All combat sports, none of us have to be certified to be called professionals. We just put a towel over our shoulder, see what you did, and go out there and do it at the sake of the fighter. And that's why my job is to teach and teach and teach. But that gets a question I'll throw to you.
Jack, what do you think? Old school in wrestling?
Well, do wrestling coaches have to be certified? That's number one question. Yeah.
No, mostly anyone can open an independent wrestling school, or the main industry schools being the WWE Performance Center and the Nightmare Factory that handles AEW talent. But the day of by and large, the day of commissions and states regulating wrestling events, that's come and gone. So you're considered a professional if you get a payoff, which could be even a hot dog and a beer in some cases, for sure.
Hey, been there, done that many times, brother. Those are the steps. Those are the steps that we have to take to get where we want to go. And you have to taste that, man. Hot dog's not too bad when you're hungry after any time.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. We got 5 minutes left, Stitch. Let me ask you a quick question. I feel like kickboxing sometimes is the redheaded stepchild of combat sports. Yeah. Kickboxing was there before MMA. Kickboxing was there before bare knuckles, before any women's fighting leagues. We had kickboxing first to start out as full contact karate. I'm sure you remember PKA karate. You had to watch it at Sunday afternoon or at midnight on a Wednesday night or whatever. And I think they had some years, really kind of glory years with K1. A lot of people were following that in the infancy of MMA. But now K1's gone and you got Glory MMA. And I think in Europe, a lot of guys are into it because there's a lot of fighters from Holland and like that. But do you think they'll ever be able to, or is there anything they can do to finally get kickboxing kind of caught up, because it seems like it's just lagging behind MMA and boxing, and almost sometimes I fear it's almost on its way to possibly obscurity if they don't start doing some more publicity or get more people interested in it. What do you think?
Yeah, more of these young athletes are going into MMA. You know,
Yeah.
if you're going to learn one style, why not learn four, right?
Yeah.
And that seems to be the nature of the movement right now. And yeah, so I don't think it's going to grow, especially here in the United States. You know, I used to work with Dennis Alexia, of course, Javier Mendez, you know, who has AKA, and Frida Gibbs, and there was a lot of top world champs that I worked with in those days. But those days are done.
Yeah, they were such exciting days. Like you mentioned, Frida Gibbs, amazing. Dennis Alexio, Don the Dragon Wilson, the Canadian Jean-Yves Theriault was absolutely amazing. Speaking about Canadians, Benny the Jet, your kitties, who I've interviewed and met several times, possibly the greatest fighter ever. So many great stories. I'm sure you probably heard Stitch about Benny the Jet going over to Japan and having his brother Arnold in his corner, and he beat one guy, and they said, okay, we want to have you fight our best guy tomorrow. And I think they said he's only 40 pounds heavier than Benny. And I remember Arnold Jr. told me that his brother said to Benny, his dad said to Benny, what do you think, Benny? And Benny said, we're here to fight. Let's fight. You know, so the next day, I think he fought a guy 40 pounds heavier than him and won. And I think along with Don Wilson kind of getting there as well to an extent, Benny was the guy that was going over to every different country back in those days and beating every single guy of every style. Whereas a lot of Americans were brought over against Thai boxing and get the living crap beaten out of them. And Benny the Jet, your kitties was the one that they did.
Even in Japan, they had a magazine, you know, for under, you know, as Benny the Jet. So yeah, he was top of the line.
Without a doubt, man. Well, I tell you, Jack, if you want to ask the last question of Stitch or whatever you want to do, and then let me say goodbye as well, or you want to do it in reverse order, whatever you want, Jack.
No, I just like to take an opportunity to sincerely thank Stitch for coming on the program and sharing his immense wealth of knowledge and experience. It's been personally illuminating for me as I continue to learn more about combat sports, and would sincerely enjoy having you on again if you can spare the time, because as in most cases we do an hour, but it feels like in this instance we really truly have scratched the surface. So
just barely.
Thank you very much, sir, and much respect.
Yeah, thank you. And let me add real quick. We're talking about this slap fighting, right?
Yeah.
I was reading today where it was an NWE. Is that one of those wrestling organizations? Well,
NWA,
whatever it was, they drew like 993,000 viewers, and then right after that was slap fighting, and they had like 295, and so that shows you the difference.
Yeah, way more people embrace wrestling. For sure. So, and also, Jack, I know you want to do that tribute. Maybe we can do that, I guess, once we wrap up with Stitch, because I know you wanted to mention that for that Canadian who lost her life. But Stitch Duran, always appreciate you. Just like Jack said, the way I was thinking, it's kind of like going out on a date with a gorgeous supermodel. No matter how many hours you're spending with her, it almost seems like you barely started and you want a lot more. That's always the way I feel when I finish talking to you, Stitch, and it's a treat and a pleasure. Just like my friend Jean LaBelle, who is older than you, passed away in heaven. I kind of feel like along with Bert Watson, you guys are like, without Jean, it was you three, and now it's down to you two. And I'm always so grateful for your time. Tomorrow we'll catch you on the MMA Power Hour on Twitter, spaces between 6 and 8. But so grateful to have you here, Stitch. You're a legend, a true gentleman, and I have the highest respect for you, and I really appreciate you, my friend.
All right, no, I appreciate it. Let me just close real quick by saying when Jack, when I worked with this Top Rank fights in the bubble at the MGM, we called it the boxing version of Shawshank Redemption.
Love that.
Had a little bit of prison time in there. I couldn't leave my room at all, man. But hey, to have a room at the MGM on lockdown is not a bad thing.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
You guys.
Thank you so much, Stitch. Appreciate you. Have a great night. You too. Talk to you tomorrow, Stitch. Have a great night. All right, now I'm going to throw it to Jack Kilby for a tribute to a lost Canadian officer.
Well,
And
as many viewers of the Hannibal TV are aware, my career has been for the past 26 years in the criminal justice system, and specifically the federal penitentiary service here in the Ontario region. And on the weekend, our community suffered a significant blow in that we lost a person that I work with for many years, supervised and worked as a colleague with a parole officer by the name of Janice Froats, who died under very, very horrific circumstances. She's left a partner and children behind, and in order to assist with expenses during this time, they've set up a GoFundMe. It's called the Support the Froats and Dixon Family. The link will be in the description. It's also on the screen. So if anybody is so inclined to check that out, that would be very much appreciated by the family. I can't say enough, much like the combat sports and pro wrestling communities, the federal penitentiary service is also a small community. And when you work with people over decades and you have such an abrupt and tragic loss, it hits us all very hard. So those of you that are able to check it out, that would be greatly appreciated.
definitely, God bless her and her family.
And with that, we're going to close another edition, a great edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. And I might as well hit the tagline. I'm going to have to get you in on this sometimes, Colin, but it's Silver Sages spreading wisdom to the younger ages. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care. Good night. Take care, Stitch. Have a great night. See you, Jack.